Well, hi, welcome to Chess Base Workshop. Excuse me, my name is Steve Lopez. I'm your host for this. Thanks for clicking on the link and joining us. We're going to take a look at, we're going to take a detour today is what we're going to do. I had been doing a series on Chess Base Lite, our free kind of a demo version of Chess Base that we offer at chessbase.com, and we're going to get back to that. I've not abandoned it. But this morning, as I was going through some older articles, just brushing up on some finer points, I came across an article, excuse me, that I had written, I guess it was about 8.5 or 9 years ago, about gambits. Now, some of you folks that are old-timers in the chess world might remember about 10 years ago I had my own website that was actually an award-winning website about gambits. Had it up for a few years till I guess about 7 years ago or so. I got tired of it and took it down. But I'd won some awards with analysis of gambits and downloads and all kinds of stuff with this website. It had been written up in some chess magazines. So I do know a little something about gambits. I'm not a great gambit player, but I do love them. They make the game pretty exciting. And I'd written an article about chess engines analyzing gambits. And if you want to go back and hunt it up, it's from, I guess it's from about 7.5, 8.5 years ago. And I was looking over it this morning, and I noticed something interesting, which is that at that time, I was talking about how some people believe that chess engines misevaluate gambit play. And I kind of took a little issue with that, because I don't think they do as bad a job as some people say. Now, what I found interesting in that article was I had a position from the Danish gambit, and I said that chess engines tend to evaluate this position as being about black is winning by a pawn and a quarter to a pawn and a half. Well, I was fooling around with the same position this morning, and I came across something very interesting. So let's take a look. I want to show you this position first of all. It's from a game, St. Petersburg match, 1879. Black pieces are being played by the great Mikhail Chigorin. Emanuel Schiffers is playing white, and Schiffers offers a gambit. And it's called the Danish gambit. If you're familiar with it, I imagine you may well be. Typical king-pawn opening, double king-pawn opening, and then white offers a pawn. Black says, well, sure, and accepts his generosity and takes the pawn. White then decides to be especially generous and offers another pawn. And black says, well, why, I don't want to insult you by turning down your generosity, so I believe I will take that pawn too. Here's where it gets interesting, because you would think that possibly at this point white might play something like, let's say knight takes c3. That's a possibility. Let's make that a new variation. But he doesn't do that. What he does instead is develops a bishop. Suddenly black kind of goes, huh, he's offering me yet another pawn. So black naturally takes it. And now white has no choice in the matter. White has absolutely got to take the pawn, otherwise he loses his rook and gives black a queen, and that's not going to be too good. So white then takes the pawn. Now, this is the position. This is the defining position, the tabia, if you will, of the Danish gambit. And it's an interesting position to talk about gambit play. Excuse me. What has white done here? What does white have? White has given up 2 pawns. What does white have in exchange? Now, people have been arguing about this opening for 150 years. Some people today will swear up and down that this is a bad opening for white, that black is already winning because of the 2-pawn advantage. John Nunn, I've seen, actually says that this is maybe a slight advantage to white, or at worst an unclear position. So it's interesting. People don't even agree. People don't agree on what the pros and cons of this position are. There's no consensus on whether white is ahead or white is behind here. Who's winning, who's losing, we're not real sure. What we do know is this: black has taken 2 pawns, rather. White has given up 2 pawns, and what white has in return is you've got this nice central pawn that's controlling a couple of squares here in the center. Also, you've got 2 pieces developed, and both of those pieces, those bishops, are slicing right into black's king side. What does black have in return? 2 pawns. Other than that, bupkis. You'll notice that black does not have a dang thing developed up here. The only thing that black has done 4 moves into the game is that black has moved the same pawn 4 times. So what white has done, white has traded material for another type of advantage, an advantage in development. But what's going to happen to white here over time, and that's ultimately what happens in this game, by the way, if you want to take a look, is that advantage will erode over time. White has to exploit this advantage. White has to act quickly, continue to develop, and form an attack, and put black on the defensive, or else that advantage is going to go away. Now, this is some really interesting stuff because it's not all that concrete. There's a little bit of vague, fuzzy logic to this. It's not something that can be expressed very easily in numerals and decimals, which is why some people contend that computers misevaluate gambits. Now, in this article I wrote 8 years ago, we had Fritz analyze this position, and actually I had used several engines, and they varied in their evaluation from saying that black is winning by about a pawn and a quarter to black is winning by a pawn and a half. And I showed that as being evidence that computers are actually recognizing that white does have some compensation for the material because they're not giving black a full 2-pawn advantage. Look down here, you can see that black is 2 pawns ahead. That's what these little 2 pawns down here at the bottom of the screen mean. But I noticed something the other day when I was looking at, or this morning rather, when I was looking at this position, and it's this. Let's fire up a chess engine. We'll have Fritz 12 take a look at this, and we're going to let Fritz chew on this for a little bit. First thing Fritz does, though, is says, well, you know, if you looked quickly enough, it said that black was winning by over a pawn. But as this analysis goes on, I'm going to let it run. Right now it's showing about a pawn, more or less, advantage to black, but as I let this run, I began to see that advantage deteriorate. As Fritz looks deeper and deeper and deeper into the position, you'll see this numerical evaluation right here continue to decline. Right now it's showing that black is ahead by about 8/10 of a pawn. That's still not 2 full pawns, so the engine is showing that white does have some level of compensation here. Now it's about 3/4 of a pawn. And as it goes on, I let it run for a while. It got up into the high teens. It showed that white was losing by about 3/4 of a pawn. Which means that, compared to 8 years ago, when positional chess knowledge was just first being built into engines, it was showing that white had a disadvantage of pawn and a quarter to a pawn and a half. Now it's saying white's got a disadvantage of 3/4 of a pawn, meaning that computers are beginning to recognize, much more so now than 8 years ago, the finer positional points of chess play. So I just thought that was a really interesting little thing here as we're looking at this position. Again, we're up to a search depth of about 16, and again it's hanging at about 3/4 of a pawn. But if we let it run, if I yammer on for a while, it will ultimately drop down. There we go. Black is now winning by 63/100 of a pawn, approximately 2/3 of a pawn, and it'll hang there for a while. And if you let this run long enough, it may change the evaluation even more. What's interesting to note is that everybody says, well, not everybody, a lot of people very vociferously, I've argued with them online, I know, will say that computers always misevaluate gambit play. And it's a definite yes and no, which is not definite at all. Human beings don't even evaluate gambit play properly. I know a lot of players that are adventurous, tactical, attacking players that would not touch this position as white with a 10-foot pole because they would say, well, I don't see the compensation here. Whereas there's other players, I'm one of them, I've played this position a bunch of times. If you can get your pieces out and get an attack going and keep black kind of reeling with these little jabs and shots here and there, black never does quite get on his feet because he's got a development disadvantage at this point. So why should computers be any different? Why should computers be some kind of divine oracle of Delphi and nail this position absolutely every time? What I'm stressing here, though, is that computers are getting better at evaluating these kinds of positions. Again, we're seeing that black still has an advantage in this position according to computers, but it's not as huge an advantage as older chess engines from 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 7 years ago were giving black in this position. By the way, we'll throw this out at you as well, just another little technical piece of emphasis here. It's showing this symbol here shows that black is slightly ahead, and here we're seeing that black is ahead by 63/100ths of a pawn. Remember that when you're looking at a chess engine's analysis, positive numbers mean that white is ahead, negative numbers mean that black is ahead, and the farther the value is from 0, the bigger the advantage. So, for example, if it was a positive 5.00, white would be a rook ahead. A negative 5.00 means that black is a rook ahead. So the farther the value is from 0, the bigger the advantage. Positive numbers mean that white has the advantage. Negative numbers mean that black has the advantage. So now, after looking at about 17 ply search depth, we're seeing that the Fritz 12 engine is still keeping it at about 2/3 of a pawn advantage for black. Although materially he's 2 pawns ahead, white does have compensation in the eyes of the computer. I just thought that was a pretty interesting little thing to throw out there since I was playing around with it this morning, especially in comparison to that older article and the older analysis I had done 7 or 8 years ago, where they were showing that black had about a pawn and a quarter to a pawn and a half advantage. So computers not only can evaluate gambits, but they're getting better at doing so. And I guess that's kind of the point that I'm driving at. It's not enough just to have an engine look at a position. You have to look at the numbers and understand what the engine is telling you. It's not enough to say, oh, black's ahead here. Why is black ahead here? And the fact is, black is ahead materially, but black is behind developmentally, and that is why black does not have a full 2-pawn advantage in this position. So engines are getting better at evaluating this kind of thing. Speaking of chess engines, we're going to look a little bit more at chess engines in Chess Base Lite in our next Chess Base workshop. Until then, have fun!